If you follow me at all, you know that one of the things that I'm most passionate about is talking about the criminal lack of funding and support for male victims of domestic violence. As I've mentioned many times before, the data is irrefutable that men are victims of domestic violence at the hands of women every bit as much as women are at the hands of men. And while that may come as a surprise to many, the reality is this has been known since day one when Erin Pizzi opened the first domestic violence shelter way back in the 1970s. A shelter which she opened to serve the needs of all victims, regardless of gender. Sadly, that was soon corrupted in favor of pushing a narrative, an agenda, which has been espoused for over 50 years now. One that says that women, and only women, can be victims of domestic violence. This despite reputable study after study, which has shown that men are indeed the victims at very similar rates to women. Recently, I wrote an article on this discussing the recent publication of the 2023 Crime Survey for England and Wales, which revealed a striking parity between male and female victims of IPV, intimate personal violence. The CSCW is a comprehensive study that captures crime experiences across England and Wales and is conducted, and this is a key point, independent of police records. In other words, it doesn't follow the existing paradigm of reporting and tracking female victims and only female victims at the expense of male ones. The 2023 survey, like so many others before it, indicated that men and women experience IPV in nearly equal numbers across almost every category. In fact, some categories show that men are the victim more often than women are. Once again, challenging the current conventional wisdom that domestic violence predominantly affects women and only women. Despite this data, there is a glaring disparity in the availability of support services for male victims, not just in the UK where this study was done, but across the Western world. Right now, there are only 2 shelters in the entire United States dedicated to helping male victims, and only 1 in the entire UK. Let that sink in for a moment. Despite the fact that rates of IPV are roughly equal between the sexes, there are only 3 shelters combined in those 2 countries, while at the same time, there's over 3,000 shelters for women. The question we need to be asking is, why? Why, despite the overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence to the contrary, are we only focusing on helping female victims? Going further, despite the balanced victimization rates, the support infrastructure and funding for it heavily favors female victims. In the U.S., roughly $1 billion is allocated each year under the Violence Against Women Act to help support female victims, which is a good thing. Yet mere pennies are allocated to help male victims. Those like my friend Bill Corbett, who are trying to get funding to open additional shelters to help male victims, are getting rebuffed time and time again by politicians, and they face vicious attacks from women's groups seeking to stop them from getting any aid to help male victims and ensure that it only goes to female. The UK is no better, as evidenced by the outcry from politicians and women's groups to the creation of a minister for men, dedicated to helping men, including those who are victims of domestic violence. This despite the fact that there's been a minister of women for years now. Again, we need to ask, why? Why are politicians, governments, and women's groups actively discriminating against male victims? The bottom line is this: research, advocacy groups, and individuals like myself have long highlighted the critical need for more services tailored to help male victims. The absence of adequate support can and has led to underreporting and prolonged suffering by those victims. And let's be clear, not one person, not one advocate who has asked for increased services for men supports reducing anything to help and assist female victims. Unlike those who oppose us, we seek to ensure that all victims of domestic violence, regardless of gender, receive the help they so desperately need. I go into this in much more detail in the article that I wrote, which you can access by going to my bio. Only by acknowledging the wrong that has been committed for decades now, the discrimination that male victims have faced, and then addressing it, can we create a more inclusive, supportive system that acknowledges and assists all victims of domestic violence, regardless of gender. It's long past time that we did.